Can I get you to start with to give me a show of hands to anyone who's either read or watched the first Harry Potter book? Just give me a wave if you have. Okay, so there's quite a few of you who'll know what I'm talking about. But it's called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And the Philosopher's Stone is this stone that alchemists were trying to discover for centuries that would enable them to turn any metal into gold and would also enable them to live forever. So really, it's a kind of sign of ultimate power, something that's going to give you unending wealth and unending life. And of course, the evil character in the books, Voldemort, is trying to get hold of this stone because power, he thinks, is the ultimate most important thing. Dumbledore, who's the head of the school that Harry goes to, gets his staff to build a whole series of protections around the stone so that Voldemort can't reach it. And the very last protection, the kind of last ditch that he would have to get through, is a protection that Dumbledore designs. And he uses a magic mirror, which when you look in it, you see your ultimate desire reflected back at you. So if Voldemort looked in it, he would see a picture of himself all powerful. And others might look in it and, like him, see what the stone could give them. But the spell that Dumbledore cast on it meant that only someone whose deepest desire was to find the stone, not to use it, that was the person who'd be able to find it. So in other words, only someone who had no desire for the power could be given it, could be trusted with this stone. Now, we've all heard all our lives about the dangers of power. Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, that sort of thing. And we see it lived out daily on the television screens. And I think we'd also, if we really look out for it, see it lived out daily in our communities, in our families, in ourselves. And so what is it in us that seeks after this power? Now, to think about that, we have to go back to a much older story than Harry Potter, the story of Adam and Eve in the garden. See, here we've got a garden full of everything Adam and Eve needed to live, one that's to live abundantly and forever, basically like having the Philosopher's Stone, fruit, grains, and the tree of life. And the only tree that was forbidden is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So it's really puzzling why when everything is so good, even Adam would risk it all for a piece of fruit. But we do have a very clever snake in this story. It realized that for the human to disobey God, she had first to doubt him, to distrust him. So the snake starts off by telling her really that God has lied to her. He tells her that the only reason God doesn't want her to eat the fruit was that it would make her as knowledgeable as God. In other words, he implies that God is selfish, power hungry, insecure, and deliberately stopping the woman from being everything that she could be. Whereas he, the snake, wants only the best for her. So Eve and Adam have on one side the God who made them from dust and bone and created the wonder of peace and beauty around them. And on the other side, a snake who was a snake, and they choose to believe the snake. So what's going on here? Why are they drawn in? You know, the snake tells them they'll be like God, but they're already like God. They're made in God's image. The snake tells them that they'll know good and evil, but they have no need of that because everything that God made was good. So the only way they can be tempted to eat the forbidden fruit is if suddenly they feel the need for power. And the only reason they need that power is because their trust in God has been destroyed. That's the bottom line. And if they can't trust God, then suddenly all sorts of protections are needed. They hide from themselves. They tuck away all their vulnerabilities, physical and emotional, behind clothes. They hide from God. They lurk away in the bushes and hope that God won't notice. They focus all this new power they've got, the knowledge of evil, on protecting themselves. Now, before this, every fruit in the garden, including the fruit of the tree of life, was theirs for the taking, because it wouldn't have occurred to them to use it to exercise power. There was no need. Now that they know evil, everything becomes a possible tool for their use, from the tree of life to the leaves on the trees around them. Everything has to be used for their protection. And that means that that ultimate power, that tree of life, the philosopher's stone, is no longer safe in their hands, and they have to be driven from the garden. So it's not that power in itself was a bad thing. Jesus had more power than we can imagine, power to do things none of us can dream of. But here's the point. Jesus could be trusted to hold the philosopher's stone, to hold the power that he took into ministry, only because he decided from the very beginning of that ministry, in the story we heard today, he decided never to use that power for himself, no matter how hard he was tempted. Power is only safe for any of us to hold when we don't want it for ourselves. How did Jesus manage to not want it? Because of his total trust in God. How can we resist it? By working on that same trust. The trust that means we know deep inside ourselves that our lives are God's and in God's hands. The trust that is perhaps the only thing that's strong enough to push away our desperate grasping after power. So, I wonder if a useful sort of discipline to consider doing over Lent might be to have a hard look at where we might deliberately welcome trust instead of our need for power. So it's not only giving something up, it's welcoming something beautiful into that space, that trust in God. Now, if you're sitting there thinking to yourselves, you're not powerful, so how does this apply to you? We all have power and we all try to use it. And I find for myself the really helpful way of recognizing when I am trying to grasp power is when I get angry. Not just full-bodied anger, but anger's little children, irritation or impatience or the desire to slander people, to speak badly about people. They're all forms of anger. And anger tends to rise up in us when we feel that power is being taken away. Now, that might be something worth thinking about either in the discussion we have after this talk or further through Lent. When you feel anger in whatever form rising up inside you, even if it's a little irritation or impatience, think, what is the power that I feel is being taken away from me? Is it the power over my use of time, power over decisions, power over other people's opinion of us, or any number of subtle things? And then ask ourselves, can we leave that power in God's hands rather than trying to seize it back? Can we resist trying to shape what people are thinking and instead trust the God who has us in God's hands? It's going to be slightly different for each of us. But if we're following Jesus on his path to the cross, and that path starts this week with Jesus himself giving up the desire to use power for himself, and ends with Jesus in Gethsemane, where he could have called on legions of angels to save him, but instead he painfully chooses the path of powerlessness for the sake of others. Perhaps if we're really following Jesus, then that's our own surprising, stunning, challenging path to resurrection. The Lord be with you.